Welcome back to part 2 of our presentation. If you haven't seen part 1, I recommend viewing it first before watching the second part. Now, in part 1, we talked about the absence of African American history in the educational system and discussed one possible collaborative solution to invite our youth to learn more about our history. Now, in part 2, we will discuss what we learned from this collaborative effort, and we'll also provide some tips on what you can do to start similar initiatives in your community. So no endeavor ever goes perfectly to plan, and sometimes you have to adjust and learn in the moment. But regardless, reflection is critical for progression. We all know that. And so we learned a few things through this process that we'd like to share with you. The first might be the difficulties of virtual interaction, as we all have experienced this past year and we're probably pretty well aware of. Sometimes the technology didn't work or the internet connection was lost when we were trying to communicate between the high school student and the college. Sometimes limitations in the software prevented everyone from viewing the same documents at the same time. And also, sometimes it made it difficult to know whether we were helping or hindering the high school students' editing progress. We also learned that it would be better if the stories were already decided and most documents collected before the first joint class, rather than waiting to let the students select the stories to pursue. Although we do lose some student buy-in if we do it that way, we do gain some time, and we also reduce the last-minute cramming to finish the projects before the virtual presentation. I was most surprised to learn that it was difficult to recruit university students. I think several factors play into this. One is the university class blocks are quite different than the high school class blocks, and this limited the availability of university students, especially for noon. Another is the course is an elective, specifically to the Human Development Family Studies major. In regards to the major, only 3% of the HFS students identify as Black or African American, which limits those who may be most interested in a course such as this. That also means recruiting outside the department is necessary. However, the university budget system discourages students taking classes outside their major, and most students are interested in quickly completing their degrees, therefore taking their major courses. Most students are also not deeply invested in the local community, and they're not here and sticking around after their degree, after they graduate, and also they're not getting a degree in African American history, and so their interest may be less because of that as well. Additionally, there are so many good causes, other electives, outreach, other courses, clubs, associations, and social justice initiatives that the pool of potential students really is a lot smaller than I think I initially thought it was going to be. However, for those university students who did enroll in the class, they loved the experience. They loved working with the high school students, working with the community. They learned a lot. And they indicated that it was a worthwhile and meaningful experience for them. So I think looking forward, I think student word of mouth may be the best recruitment strategy for this type of course.
One of the unexpected challenges my students had in this process was the process of revision. I realized that students often do not have practice in revising their own work. They become accustomed to submitting their work and viewing grades and comments without the added step of changing their work. In this project, students were asked to revise multiple drafts of their scripts of local African American histories. Students received feedback from academic and community experts, from weaving new information into their narratives upon learning more from a descendant, to changing phrasing and words to better honor the people they were writing about, to adding explanations about complex and confusing historical events. Students got deep in the process of revision. In the challenging weeks of writing these histories, students learned to take revision not as a judgment on their writing ability or their intelligence, but as a critical part of becoming historians. As a teacher, I learned that I needed to prepare students beforehand and during this process. At first, they were quite alarmed to see the amount of red ink on their initial scripts. But as we discussed what the process of revision was like, students realized that revisions were not only necessary, but something valuable to ask for. Throughout this process, I also learned the importance of grouping students. A diverse group of ability and interests is important, but finding students who work well together is critical for a project such as this. In this, it would be helpful to see students work in groups before embarking on this project to see the dynamics of students in various pairings. As with all group work, students can become frustrated if the level of participation and work ethic varies from group member to group member. Offering students a variety of group roles to choose from would be helpful for the team's morale and group aspect. That way, every student is invested in the project and no one student is pressured with all the work. I also instituted a group role evaluation for all students to complete at the end of the semester, so students would be held accountable for how they worked and how they treated their group members. This semester, I also learned the major benefits along with some of the drawbacks of using a virtual approach to this project. Because of COVID restrictions and quarantines, video conferencing apps like WebEx and Microsoft Teams were invaluable for all my groups to meet with their college students and Dr. Bubb. On the other hand, it was sometimes challenging to coordinate with our college students virtually. Spotty internet issues, finding the correct document to analyze together at the same time, sending back and forth scripts with no one common version to work from, and being unable to monitor all conversations with my students and Dr. Bubb's college students were some of the challenges we faced throughout the semester. It taught me that the preferable version of this project would be meeting face-to-face in the classroom, but that with extra organization and the right tech tools, the project is viable virtually. Certainly with the advent of digitized records and the ability of our college partners to find documents and upload them to a shared folder, meant that my students could access all the information they needed from the classroom, even when we couldn't take field trips to find the documents ourselves.
I recommend that before you consider starting a collaborative effort such as this to research and tell these sacred stories about African American history, that you make sure that your heart is right, that you are emotionally fit, and that you are in it for the long haul, and that you're open to learning and you're open to changing. This work is not for the faint of heart. Expect to receive criticism from every which way and up. It's going to happen. If you want to do this work, you need to have an honest conversation with yourself and ask, what is my intention? What impact am I trying to make? And I think more importantly, ask, are my intentions in line with those in the community? You also need to ask who benefits from this endeavor, and not just financially. Is the community benefiting? Are the descendants benefiting? History is unfortunately full of people who have benefited at the expense of the Black African American community. So you need to make sure that you are transparent in your intentions. Now, this conversation is one that must be had with the descendants at the very beginning of your interactions with them. I get paid to teach this class, and the community needs to know that. Is the community getting as much or more, and not just financially, than I am? Now, this next point, I will be direct. If you identify as white, you need to ask yourself, are you open to dialogue? Are you open to making adjustments to your thinking, your behavior, and how you were taught to learn culturally? Because it is inevitable that you will offend someone at some point. And probably not just once, you'll probably do it a few times. I know I have, right? And so this issue is not so much in the offense, right, but rather in the response to that offense. Are you open to an honest dialogue without defensiveness? Are you flexible in your thinking? Can you be genuine in your apology? These are all things that are important to think about if you're going to take on this sacred work. Now, I don't say this to discourage you, right? I say it so that you are prepared. I say it so that you can have a successful partnership in telling these sacred stories.
The questions that we want to ask are, What are the sacred stories? Where are there sacred stories, or where are there stories that you want to know more about, but you need the help of these youth? Where are the sacred spaces that are dwindling or diminishing because of just growth, or because of the lack of discussion about it anymore? Where are these sacred spaces? Is there a cemetery, a building? Is there a family? Is there a church? Is there a school? Where are the sacred spaces? And why are these sacred stories important to this community? They included persons. They're not just names. They're not just dates. They're not just a space, but there were personalities. These were individuals who had lives that dwelled in these spaces to make these spaces who they were and to make us who we are, and to also include our youth to make them who they are and who they can be. And so these are the sacred narratives. These are the sacred narratives. The question then is, as we create community around our sacred narrative, pull our youth in, pull our educators in, pull our other organizations in, who is directly related to the story? I am directly related to my family story. And also, what other families can I point people in their direction? Or what other entities am I related to? And then do I have story about? Is there a church? Is there a cemetery? Is there a school? Do I have this information? Who has this information, and how do I contact these people? That's where you come into play as a community. You are integral in helping to connect the community that will now surround themselves around the story, but surround themselves and undergird the youth as they help us care, carry, and curate these stories. What are the sacred spaces that are binding in the community today? Is that a school? Is that a particular church building? Is that a particular church and faith body? Who is the pastor there? Is there a regular gathering of people around something that is sacred to them? There are family reunions. Do you need to be at those family reunions? And we'll discuss that in a minute. Where are the spaces that we're connecting with community? As we connect with community, there are critical people that need to be there that now have to become a part of our larger families and of our larger community. It's academia and it's our youth. It's inviting them into the space of our story. It's inviting them into the space of our unique experience and allowing them to get to know us through our experience with them and us getting to know them. So now we're not just curating and carrying and caring for a story, but we're continuing that story together as we now tell a holistic and an entirety of the view of a community, of a people that helped build a community, that helped build a city, that helped build a school, whatever the case may be. That's what we're doing. How are we building trust in that partnership and in that team building? Because these youth and our other partners, our schools, our universities, the professors, the teachers, the historical and preservation societies, they now are becoming a part of our trusted community. And we have to build trust with them, because what we're doing is we are handing sacred narrative, and we're handing sacred space over for them to help us care for these things. So who are our trusted sources? My trusted sources have become Dr. Robert Bubb and Ms. Halperin, as they have now become a part of my family, as we now are curating and caring and carrying the stories, not only of my personal family, but the families of my community that are descendant families and that have been in the community for over 100 years. We're carrying and curating together the information and the history of those buried in a sacred space called Baptist Hill Cemetery. We're pulling in the current pastor of the church that is connected to the Baptist Hill Cemetery. We're working with other persons throughout the community as they're now wanting to discover more about their families. Because what will happen as we become do more gelling as a team, and as we come together around certain sacred narratives, people will want to know more. People will want to share more, but they have to know that they can trust you. Can the elderly trust you with the story? Can they trust you with some of their deepest concerns about the story? Can they trust you with the highs and the lows, the joys, the gladness, and the sadness of the story? And can the community trust you to carry, curate, and care for that sacred story and that sacred space? How do we build partnerships? By sitting down with one another and understanding what the purpose is that we're here for. It's more than names. It's more than dollars. It's more than dates on a headstone. It's for the purpose of pulling our youth in to ensure that they have a good grounding of who they are, of where they come from, and of making sure they know where they're able to go. It's the entire West African idea and concept of Sankofa. It's flying forward while looking backwards and grasping those things that are behind us as a part of our history and as a part of our story that are critical for us to move on. And then there is the curating of community around the story. How can we create joint efforts to share narrative, do more research, gather the community together around these stories and spaces? It's not a one-time deal and you're done. It's not a one-time event and you're done. We're constantly looking for ways to engage the entire city, to engage the community, to engage those families together whose love and intimacy as community have brought us together.
This project is certainly replicable in your own community. Schools love having parents and grandparents and community involvement in their classrooms. There are a few things you can do as you approach teachers in schools to make the project more likely to be approved and succeed. First, find out when and in what course African American history is taught and is part of the curriculum. You can find that information on your state's course of study online. It may not even be a history class that you find a curriculum link. Many humanities courses, including English classes, have a Black history standard. Then, come prepared when you approach a teacher with your proposal. It is immensely helpful to have a lesson plan in place. What are the objectives this project would accomplish? What course of study standards would the project meet? How many class days would this project involve? What would the outcome of the project be? The more you have established, the less stress and work on the teacher, and the more likely a collaboration can take place. Know that students and teachers will need to get approval from their administration, which can be a lengthy process. Start planning early. The beginning and the end of the school year is crazy for everyone. So the middle of the semester before the next semester begins, while months before the actual project, is a perfect amount of time to begin planning. For example, Dr. Bubb approached me in February 2020, and we met several times by phone before starting the project in late August 2020. Finally, consider the age appropriateness of the content you will be covering with the students. Ideally, teaching African American history will be reinforced at different grades throughout a student's education, so content can be covered at different levels. For instance, the hardest truths of racial terror and lynching do not have to be explored in depth at the 4th grade level in Alabama, though by the time they're in 11th grade, those truths must be explored. Check with community members and teachers as experts before introducing stories that may bring controversy to the classroom. For one story of local lynching in Lee County, Dr. Bubb first introduced the story to me. I confirmed with other teachers and administrators and community members whether it was an appropriate story to write about with my 11th graders, and then we proceeded. It ended up being one of the most meaningful stories that we wrote about, but had we not talked it through with multiple sources beforehand, I may not have had the backing to explore the story with my students.
It's by partnering with the local community, the keepers of the stories, and the visiting of these sacred spaces that a new generation is allowed to engage and in with the story and to forge new community relationships. It's all about community. And if we're going to continue to grow the story, to expand the story without community, there's nothing. Without an individual within community willing to share, you don't have community. And so in us being able to gather together, how do you do it? Do you have an old-fashioned potluck? Do you call together those elders of the family just so they can tell stories? Do you invite these people to your family reunion? Is there a church homecoming that's going on and you invite them to? Is there a space? Is there a subject that you can be creative to pull people together around these stories? You've got to be creative. You've got to get out of the box in a creative way. Our whole purpose is connecting youth to community, and it's connecting them to the people, and it's connecting the people to them. It's connecting to the person that wants to care for the story and learn more about the story, to the person that has the story and wants to share the story. And it means developing relationship. You may not walk in and get that story time you connect with the family, but the more you develop relationship, an authentic relationship, it means being fully vested in the story. It means being fully vested in that family, that community, that agency, that organization, that cemetery. It means being fully vested in it because now you're connected to it. And because you're forever connected to it, you will not be able to fly forward without remembering that story. And that's what we're wanting to give to our youth. We're wanting to make sure they have that. And so as we pull team together and as we connect community, my family's 185-year history in a space can now go deeper and go further, and it can help others because now we have a group of youth that are connected to it. Not only the youth that are connected at school, but find other ways, whether it's the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the church youth group, youth leadership groups, and the youth and the children within your own families. Get them involved. Find a way for them to be raised up to be the next generation of griots, the next generation of jollies, the next generation of storytellers, and those that are keepers of the narratives. We are encouraging each of you to engage with your students and not just researching as a product, as a project, but we are engaging for the continuation of a sacred story. And so I encourage you to do the same thing that we have done. Engage our youth, engage our families, connect them in family, connect them in community for the continuation of this sacred story in this sacred space that now has given our children roots and wings to fly. Thank you.